about the same size as Alaska, and I was really, really excited. I kind of pushed and prodded my way into an experience with three scientists and 3 scientists in training who were going to go. They're doing a multi-year project on the ice sheet, and when I first reached out to them and I heard about it, and I said, I want to come with you. Can I please come with you? And the answer was like, well, that's very nice that you're interested. No. This is a National Science Foundation grant. We can't take any more people. We're leaving in a month and a half. And I was like, I hear that no, and now we're going to turn it into a yes. So I pretty much kind of wouldn't leave them alone. And I made this big case for them that they weren't going to have to baby me. I love to go backpacking. I'm outdoorsy. I can handle anything. And I think honestly that is partly why they eventually caved and said yes. So here I am about to, this is flying into our field site over the Greenland ice sheet in the helicopter. And here we are unloading the helicopter. And the very first thing I notice when I step out of the helicopter is that it is windy. It's windy like gale force winds. And you can sort of see people are kind of struggling against it as we're trying to unload the helicopter. And I was like, oh my God, I'm an audio producer. There is nothing worse for audio than wind. And I was just like, did I just sign up? Did I just beg and plead and push to get on this trip? And I'm not even going to be able to record anything for 5 days. So I was having like a little bit of a minor freak out, but I thought, okay, it's all right. We'll be all right. I'll figure this out somehow. And the most important thing I had to worry about, though, was putting up a tent. We all had tents, and there was a big group tent that we were going to use as well. And the head researcher, Joel Harbour, he gave us this little bit of advice as the wind was just whipping. I don't know how well you'll be able to hear it, but we'll give it a try.
The key to setting up your personal tent is do not let the tent go away, or you will never see it again. Cold for a while.
Because you could just feel that if you let your tent go for 1 second, it would just be gone on the ice sheet. And I was like, that's okay. You know, I'm hardy. I can set up tents. I've set up tents everywhere. He had also said, don't step in any holes. And they told us that before we got out of the helicopter, but as it turns out, there's holes everywhere. There's just tons of ice moving around up on the ice sheet. Now, these holes are not holes that are, well, the river will kill you, but these other holes are not holes that will kill you, but some of them go down, you know, as much as a foot or foot and a half, so you can just end up with really wet feet really quickly, and that's not the first thing you want to do when you're trying to get your tent set up. So don't step in a hole, don't let your tent blow away, and all the while I'm about to prove to them that I'm like not going to be the liability on the trip, right? I can do this. But then Joel hands me this thing, and there's not really scale here, but it's like, if I was hanging on to it, it would hit the ground. Like it's a huge drill. And he also starts handing out these giant pieces of bamboo. And then he's like, all right, we're going to work on the group tent. You guys go get your individual tents set up. And I was like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm supposed to have this drill. I don't know why they handed me a bunch of pieces of bamboo. I've convinced them that I'm like the hardy journalist who's not going to be a liability. So I started kind of wandering around on the ice sheet, like what happens here? Luckily, I looked up after a while and I noticed that the 3 grad students were also doing the same thing. This is a demonstration of what we were doing. Just wandering. We were dragging these giant heavy things behind us, and I was like, okay, we all look like we just got dropped off on Mars, and so I kind of huddled them together. And we asked for help, and Joel ended up teaching us how to do this, and they were laughing about it. And I guess I just wanted to start with that story because I feel like it's important to understand that this is from inside my tent a little bit later. I think it's really important to understand for us as journalists, and maybe also for you as teachers, you probably are dealing with this all the time, that we don't always have to have all the details figured out ahead of time, right? Sometimes you just gotta dive in and make it work and ask for help along the way. And they weren't at all upset with me that I didn't know how to do this. Turns out you use a drill to make this really, really, really deep hole in the ice sheet, and then you use this giant 6-foot bamboo stakes. As you know, normally I think of tent stakes as something that's about this big. Well, when it's that windy and you're setting up on ice, you have to have a tent stake that's taller than your head, and you drive them into the ground, and then the ice sheet kind of like refreezes around them, and that's how your tent holds still while you're there. So, just a little bit of a personal anecdote, just to kind of pull the curtain back behind what on the podcast hopefully sounds a little bit more professional than that. So what are these scientists trying to do on the Greenland ice sheet? Well, they're basically trying to understand how the second largest ice cube in the world moves and changes as we warm up the planet. The biggest piece of ice left on land is in Antarctica. The many giant chunks of ice that make up that cover Antarctica. That's where the largest possible sea level rise comes from. But just behind that is Greenland. So it's a really, really, really important piece of ice. And there's so many fascinating things that they're having to do to try to understand this. And as teachers, I think that, whether you're coming at this from a literary perspective, just the poetry and description of this thing, whether you're interested in history and archaeology, people are taking ice cores out of this to help us understand what was going on in the climate hundreds of thousands of years ago, which is just pretty fascinating to stand on an artifact from a time, before humans were out wandering around in the world. And also just in terms of like science and engineering and technology, this is one of the other principal investigators. His name's Neil Humphrey. He's at the University of Wyoming. He's kind of a genius. He's kind of a mad scientist type, and he's making these tiny, tiny little computers, essentially, on these little chips, and he puts them inside kind of old-fashioned film canisters. Remember those little things? Something like that, and he kind of packs them in with this resin. They drill holes 700 meters down through the ice sheet and send these little computers down there. And he figured out how to let them run to be able to measure temperature and pressure and movement for a year, running on nothing but 2 AA batteries. And climate change is scary, and climate change is hard to talk about in so many ways. But when you get into some of these details, it's also just fascinating, like what they have to create and figure out what they even need, and then go make it, and then go make it run. It's sort of like nerd paradise. If you have some kids who are super into just problem solving and like getting into the little technical details, this is a growth area. And I just found it fascinating to just watch him and listen to him as he was trying to solve all these little technical problems, most of which I didn't understand. And the vast majority of people probably don't need to understand all the details, but the concept of like, I'm going to try to make something tiny, measure this enormous thing using almost no power in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, it's just pretty fascinating. And it's also, the ice sheet is just beautiful. You kind of heard me having my moment of awe there in that initial piece of tape, but I had that over and over and over. This is looking down into a crack in the ice sheet. These things are very scary. You can actually, people do die by slipping into cracks that are a little bit bigger than this. And it's a big, powerful force, and it's just interesting to be standing on something that is completely silent and at the same time has all this power. It's shaping the earth underneath it. In fact, it's so heavy it's compressing the earth. I don't know if you've heard of this term, isostatic rebound. But as ice sheets melt, they're so heavy that when they melt and that water runs off of them, the land actually bounces back. And this is still happening on our planet in different parts of the world. Like in Scandinavia, where the ice sheets were one of the most recent places where we had ice sheets where people are now living, the land is still rising there. That's how heavy these ice sheets are, that it takes just thousands of years for the land to return to a non-ice sheet level. I think that this clip was in that initial little bit of audio you heard, but I'm just going to play it one more time.
If you took all this ice and converted it to water and added it to the ocean, sea level would come up 7 meters. Whoa. So that's how much ice is here. Quite a lot.
Quite a lot. And I think that, understanding what that means intellectually when you're sitting at home and maybe you're reading a report showing the Arctic from above on a map or something is one thing, but to be standing right next to it and watching that melt happen is another. It impacted me in a deep, visceral way. And I really think that as teachers, as journalists, as all of us who are trying to do communication and learning around these issues, the more we can bring ourselves, our students, our audiences into that tangible physical experience, I think that's really key for opening up the conversation.